back to another exciting episode of the Information Revolution.
We're excited.
Yeah, very exciting for all concerned.
Absolutely.
It's a podcast for people who work with information. And today we've decided we're going to be talking about what we consider a failure of EDRMS. So I think we'll just quickly do our intros first. So my name is Michael Upton. I'm an information management consultant in New Zealand. I work for a little company called Metataxis.
And I'm Judi Vernau. I work for that same little company in Wellington, and I'm an information architect.
And I'm Karl Melrose. I work for Castlepoint Systems in Canberra, and a disclaimer that my views are my own.
That's right. So, in terms of the topic for today, we just feel that there's definitely something worth exploring about the idea of EDRMS and what it's even for and whether or not it's actually worked. Because, in my experience, as a super broad generalization, it hasn't. It really has not. Um,
Mm.
and I think we probably need to start with, well, if we're going to say that something's failing, then what's it supposed to be doing?
And
What's
also, I mean, we talk about EDRMS, but EDMS has also been around for a long time, and therefore, what do we think the difference is? And should we just say it's an electronic
Yeah.
document and records management system as opposed to just a document management system? So what do we think it does? I mean, obviously, it does document management. And
Yeah, I,
yeah,
I, I mean, I bump into this is one of these key differences that I bump into all the time. I mean, I think we've got to look at the body of practice that's attached to each one of these sort of paradigms as we go as well, because you don't see document control, which EDMS, document management, generally paired with document control and document controllers. You don't see it popping up everywhere, but where you do see it popping up, it's generally well understood. People investing in it. They know what it's for. The organisation knows what it's for, and it generally seems to be a success when I see it.
I would say in that context, with document control and quality management solutions, and come on, brain, and utilities companies and things, it's quite a narrow scope of what's expected to go into that kind of solution. That you put things through a process and they reach a formal status,
yeah,
and that's what you're tracking. Um, so that's what I see with things that are typically called a DMS and are working in the way that you described, Carl.
yeah, I'd agree with that too. Actually, yeah, it is a formal process, and people are very clear what goes in there.
They're also very clear about why, though, too.
Hmm.
And I mean, what's really interesting is that if you look at what's going on in the in what we might call the EDMS space, which I mean, from what I see, it's the same systems, but it's just different practices around the systems. Um, I mean, the same thing's happening to them that's happening to record systems. I mean, people are buying a sort of generic document management system less often, and more often they're going and they're buying something like Aconex or so whatever industry they're in, a line of business management system, and then they're still hiring document controllers to make sure that stuff goes in, the right stuff goes in there. It's the right version. The drawings that are in there, are the right version. They are the latest version. All that stuff, because organizations know. I mean, one of the organizations that I worked with that was doing some of this stuff, they knew they were going to have to maintain this asset for the next 50 years. And so if they didn't have the right construction drawings, I mean, the cost of, you know,
Mm.
get the cost of stuffing something up because you don't have the right construction drawings, or manufacturing something without the right drawings, is gigantic, and they know it.
So just to be clear, so those kinds of line of business systems do manage documents and they manage them as part of a sort of a broader process or workflow
Yeah,
with other sort
yeah,
of descriptive data, or I don't know, something else that's not just documents, but
yeah,
through a kind of a defined interface that makes sense of the business process.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well put.
yeah. I've seen that. I've seen that with, for instance, construction, which I guess is the kind of thing you're describing there. That
Yeah,
it's like, why not go and procure a product that basically works you through all the things you need to do in the construction process, and part of that is capturing good records about that process. which come in formatted documents largely, but also just include straight up data. Yeah.
So Michael was making a point in the pre-show discussion that, you know, we've all seen records management systems work really well in law firms, and it's just interesting because, you know, I don't get to talk to the heads of, you know, agencies that I've worked with. You know, I actually can't think of a time when I've actually been able to talk to the chief executive about records, or, you know, whoever's at the top. But, you know, I've sat down with half a dozen partners from different law firms who have been happy to spend time talking about records, and, you know, that it's actually interesting how mature their perspective on it's been. You know, they really understand that's their business. You know, their business is, you know, their knowledge and how they use it, the records they keep around it. I mean, the whole legal profession actually, you know, floats on records of past cases. So it's just interesting that you go into a law firm, they bill in 6-minute intervals, you know, and they keep amazing records about the cases they're working on, because if they don't, they have bad outcomes, and
Things
they
go
know.
wrong. Huh?
Yeah,
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 Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's cultural. And it was,
Yeah.
you know, while we were thinking about, you know, because I think this is a topic that we're all, I think we're all a little bit uncomfortable talking about, you know, EDRMS as a failure, you know, because we've all spent so much time, you know, working for those organisations and implementing them and those sorts of things. But I mean, I was just trying to think about, you know, this failure analysis is almost also about creating a blueprint for making something successful. And I was actually just trying to think about, you know, what are the things that you actually do to make an EDRMS successful? Because I have seen them successful, you know, a couple of times. Um, you know, and you know, it's important to define what success is. You know, I mean, success for me is, you know, you write a policy, and the policy says that you've got to do these things in these situations, and, you know, a very, very high percentage of the time that you're supposed to do those things in those situations, they're actually done. So, you know, I mean, if you sit down and you write a policy like we do, you know, in government agencies, that says, you know, every piece of information that, you know, that's used in the transaction of government business by a public service, or whatever the, you know, wording of your relevant policy is, um, and then you go into a government agency and 98% of the information isn't in the you know, the records management system that the policy says the records have to be in, then for me, I think we've got to consider that a failure. So it's really about, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, everything has to be in an EDRMS everywhere, but I'm saying that, you know, you write a policy, and your effectiveness of that policy, you know, should be high. And I think that when we write a policy that says, you know, everything is a record and must go in the EDRMS, I mean, I think, you know, before we started this morning, I was sitting down and trying to sort of bullet out the things that need to be in place for that idea to be successful. And it's so contextual, you know, it's the death by 1,000 cuts, you know. Okay, in the law firm, it's one very strong thing, you know, but it's culture, you know, it's something that's evolved over a long period of time to solve a set of problems peculiar to that industry. So
Also point to something that I think is quite different, where we generally, or where I'm normally working with government clients and we talk about EDRMS, there is this policy, or there is this intention that all records that need to be retained as defined by an external, you know, by the regulator, um, all go in the one place. Whereas in a law firm, the focus and the thing that I think is succeeding is basically a line of business, you know,
yeah,
or a set of cases that relate to a particular um, business need as well. So yes, it's cultural, but it's um, there's many EDRMs out there where I've seen, you know, a particular line of business or a function is humming, you know, like, and that's the same thing I see with the law firm. But I think part of the problem is that kind of um, scoping of success, I suppose, for an EDRMS is basically saying, oh yeah, everything's going in. You know, in New Zealand, and I'll try not to sort of get into going on about the regulator again, but, you know, success for an EDRMS must accommodate, you know, I think the R in that must be about retaining things according to agreed rules, right? And so we have to talk about it in that context. We have to talk about compliance. And um, uh, for an example in New Zealand that I was thinking about, the master record of all external communications must be retained and transferred to archives if you're a central government agency. So how often is that going to happen? How often is some kind of potentially like video recording or outsourced uh, commissioned piece of publicity, basically, how often is that going to end up in your EDRMS, and how much effort would it take to focus on all of these different lines of business that are doing the kind of corporate stuff that, corporate stuff happens in law firms as well. And when I'm thinking about the success of law firms, I'm not actually thinking about that. I'm thinking about
Yeah.
how well they manage case files related to basically legal matters.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the what's going wrong with the needy RMS is that, for better or worse, we're basically asking people to fit everything into one sort of, kind of square peg round hole kind of idea. Let's ram it all into the one system, and let's expect that we can somehow resource the amount of effort required to get all these diverse bits of an organisation um, to agree that that's a good idea and that they want to do that, when potentially it doesn't actually give them anything in terms of their own sort of organisation and as in how they organise themselves during
Yeah.
their day.
So is that
Yeah,
more about, I mean, it seems to me that it's actually in theory, a good thing to give people one place to put things, because then they don't have to think,
yeah,
oh, should I be putting it in here, or should I be putting it in there, or I've created
yeah,
something here. Oh, now I've got to put it into here. That's a drag. I can't be bothered to do it. So giving them one place to put things is actually a good thing, you could argue. And I think I probably would argue.
yeah.
Um, the problem is how that one thing is structured and the kinds of functionality that that one thing has. So, I mean, with the traditional EDRMS, we won't name any names, there's usually only one way of organizing things, for example. And if that doesn't suit you, then that's a problem. So you're going to start pulling against that. I mean, I think EDRMS probably did work reasonably well in the beginning. I mean, when they were first introduced, if they were structured reasonably well, if they were understood reasonably well, because there was less content around, less documents, records, and all that stuff. But as things have got more sophisticated and people have got more sophisticated, and the word collaboration never used to come up, but now it
Yeah.
does.
See, I'm not sure about this because I talk to, and this predates me, so I'm really running on. I'm really running on other people's knowledge, but talking to friends of mine who were around for the transition from paper to electronic in government, and um, that they a lot of the same things were there. When did people send their things to the records team? Well, when they ran out of space in their office and had to move out into and were either going to send things to the records team or move out into the hallway. That was the paper
Hmm.
paradigm. And then, so for a lot of those people, the same thing continued. But I think a lot of records teams fought the transition to electronic for a really long time. And then I think when they, and I remember somebody from Rempa talking about it recently, talking about how, it was really sold as, people are going to keep their records and it's going to be great. And, but I think a lot of organisations, probably all of them, took a system that was designed for professional records people, who understood a classification scheme, had the time, had that learning time necessary to understand, all of the business activities and where they fit. And then they gave that system to ordinary people who still can't understand it. I'm definitely on record of bashing functional classification at many points in the past. Um,
Very. Yeah, doesn't make sense to me. Not often. I would add that, an EDRMS, in my experience, as good as always exists in parallel with another place where people can save electronic documents. So there's always, like, workers can ordinarily but as good as always, put something somewhere else and provide access to that, to their colleagues. So I'm talking about shared drives normally. Sometimes it's just they've got personal drives and they just email attachments around. But I really think this is part of the complexity, is that people are putting information places that suits them
Mm,
most for their day-to-day
mm.
work. And then there's this thing about, and then there's something else I do, and or I'm supposed to do, I think, and it's, I'm supposed to put some stuff over in the EDRMS, and the thresholds or reasons or criteria, for putting that stuff in the EDRMS are often not things that matter to those people. And they might sometimes, and I think that's where the greatest success would always be, is that people go, yeah, great, I actually want a subset of all this, stuff that I'm working on to go somewhere and go, cool, that's the authoritative record of what I've done. And they might not use those words, but that's what they want. They want something they can rely on. Where's the kind of key documentation around that thing I was working on? And
Yeah, again,
but
how
but the thresholds or the reasons for saving things from a compliance perspective are not the same reasons
Yeah,
that I think would motivate someone to put something into an
yeah,
EDRMS.
that's the
And
problem. That's
then,
the problem.
yeah, well,
I
one
mean,
of the
I
problems.
Well,
see.
yeah,
Then
yeah,
I
yeah,
think,
yeah.
just one more bit on top of that, is that then I think that you start to undermine the value of that idea of, let's say, the good idea of having things in one place where you go look for them, is um, I think in almost all organisations, a records function is completely fighting uphill against the idea of kind of getting that everyone across the business with diverse needs and requirements and ways of working, to have a clear idea of what it is that goes in the EDRMS, even if they were to do it. You know, so I think it's
I've
no
never,
surprise that it normally doesn't work.
Yeah.
I've never been with an organisation that would not gain greatly from a single source of the truth.
Sure,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely,
Can't
absolutely,
disagree with
no
that.
question.
That's what everybody says, isn't it? I want single source
But
of the
how we,
truth. Yeah, I want version
but how we
control.
articulate the value of that and measure the loss of value that's occurring by not having one, I think is probably one of the places where, you know, I mean, I've had fights with people about how, the business are the custodians of records, and it's kind of almost there's this, job that for some records team the job is to provide the system and write the policy, and then it's because the business are the custodians of the records, it's their job to put the records in the system, and I don't really understand what that rant is actually useful for. Now
But
that I think about it,
I
but
mean, the records managers are actually only one kind of customer, as it were, for the system, aren't they? There's always been this tension, I think, for as long as systems have been storing our content, between what
yeah,
the records managers need and what the general users need. Always been that tension because it's
yeah,
so
yeah.
different.
I think, and I think
yeah,
where I was going with that little rant though too is that, I mean, I think as a professional group, I think we have we've walked up to a point and then we've stopped, and the place that we actually needed to get to in order to make the model successful is just beyond that. It's the, and I've talked about this before. It's the information Taylorism. It's the literally time and motion, standing there with the stopwatch and going, right, you've just spent 25 minutes looking in 4 different systems to try and find the thing that you want. And now you've come to the conclusion that either we don't have it or we've lost it. And so now you're going to go back to a client, to a customer of some kind, and ask them to fill it out again. And then you're going to, do your thing when it comes back in. That's just cost you an hour. And we've been sitting here on this process, and you've done the same thing 10 times today. And over the life of the business, that's going to cost XYZ. I don't think we do enough of that work, because that really is the work that you need to do in order to sit down and say, here is the value of a single source of the truth. You need to be there when the single source of the truth is not there, and you need to measure the gap.
Yeah, yeah,
And I don't think that that's something that we've
yeah.
done and something that we've articulated really well. And I think without us doing that, I mean, I think IT systems are seen as good enough because people put things in them and they come back and they're still there.
I totally
And
agree. I've encouraged people so many times to try and do exactly that kind of before and after measurement, and yeah, it just, yeah, it never happens. I've never seen it
and
happen.
I think there's this great tendency in Australia and New Zealand to bash American record keeping models, particularly with Microsoft 365 popping up at the moment. Oh, that's a declare a record model, and I've heard people say that lots of times. Well, you know what? I mean, if you've got everybody doing their work in a file server and you've got an EDRMS over here and you're sitting there going, well, you should move your things over at the end. That's a declare model, people.
Yep.
You're running
Yep.
you're running a declaration model, because you're going to say we're going to get to a point and then we're going to declare a record, by putting it in a record system. Until then, I mean, it's a declare model, and we've got this fiction that we're
Yes. Yeah. And what I would say about that, let's take away that kind of language. The idea that I want to identify a subset of the most important information, and I want to, oh yeah, okay, I'll use the word declare. I want to declare something's importance. Basically, I want to declare something's significance or its status, or and often this will be about its approval status. So a classic example would be with a policy. Like, this is the version of the policy that is in force now. The idea of being able to have a mechanism that does that is actually is really good. It's really useful, and I've seen that in organisations that have really good search. Is that an aspect of really good search is that you can find the authoritative version of something, right? So it's not just that you can, it's kind of a classic thing that actually search. The problem is normally you find too much, and how do you find the authoritative version of something? That manual process of moving a subset of information into a certain place, and then you see a search result and you go, oh, cool, it's in the important stuff bucket. That's actually a really useful mechanism for people. But it comes back to, like, right at the start, what we're saying about sort of what's successful about, for instance, a law firm or a sort of document management paradigm where people are putting a certain thing in, is that they're only putting that effort into the right things, I suppose, and they're not sort of expecting to apply the same standard to everything. And I think the other aspect of it is that they the business, so the custodian, whatever, is they get the value in doing that. Like, that they are doing that because it serves their work rather than because it serves someone else's requirements.
I mean, the socio-technical piece for me, it's these are a business system. An EDRMS is a business system. We use it to keep business records, but without a set of processes around it that rely on that system, then it really doesn't exist as far as the sort of internal workings of the organization go. And it's simple things like the use case that you just talked about. What's the authoritative version of a thing? Well, I mean, that's not a system feature. You don't sit down and say, here is the system feature that says here is the authoritative
Well,
thing. Let me finish that,
sure.
because I can put 50 things in there and mark them authoritative. But unless your organization has a routine where it says, here is where you go for the authoritative thing, and that becomes a cultural thing where every single time somebody wants the latest version of that thing, they go to that place, then it doesn't work. And as soon as somebody goes, oh, we hired this team of 5 contractors over here, and we can't get them an EDRMS license because they're contractors and the license is $500 and we can't get, I mean, how often does that happen? Or, because they're contractors, we can't get them security cleared, whatever. So we're just going to take the authoritative document and put it somewhere else. Well, you've just broken that process and you've just broken the whole thing. And all of a sudden, the organization will get used to going somewhere else to get that document, and that authoritative source is no longer authoritative. I mean, I've done projects where we've tied websites to EDRMS systems so that people always have access to the authoritative version, and those kinds of things. The process really does work, but it's whenever people are interacting with a system and it has to do something, it's not just a system feature. And I think that's a lot of what EDRMS misses. It's the routines that the organization has to have around the system for it to become something that gets used and updated and valued.
Yeah, I think I hadn't quite thought about this before, but in my experience of EDRMS, there isn't that. Yeah, there isn't such a good facility for example, promoting those authoritative versions, as you say. I mean, not like 365 is, where you've got the ability to publish things as well as just store and surface them, as it were, and to say this is where you go to for the authoritative version. This is the publishing hub where you find the good stuff, and the rest of it is your working documents. In my experience, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, but the traditional EDRMS was just where you put stuff into a structure, rather than having any sense of this is more important than that. Is that true?
There are lots of there are lots of features in these systems. There are some of them that let you do things like the person who is the owner of the document, will see we'll see the latest version of it, but everybody else will only see the latest published version or the latest finalized version.
Right.
There's a finalize or publish kind of feature in them. So that stuff exists,
Right.
but it's still without that people routine around it. What makes people go to a place to get the the authoritative thing?
And I just wanted to pick up on, we were talking about, I think, how line of business systems seem to work better, if I've understood that correctly. But can you not design your EDRMS so that it effectively is, a number of several different line of business systems, as it were? That's how I would see it. So each,
I think there's potential there.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think that's part of how I would talk about Microsoft 365
yeah,
is the
exactly.
possibility of doing that.
Yeah,
I see that more, almost like a platform
yeah,
that you can establish solutions on.
But I think that was the dream of workflow for lots of
Yeah,
EDRM
yeah,
systems. Was that it would become a business
correct.
system, and you've got a
Yeah.
document driven process here. So here's your entry point document, and here's all the steps it has to go through, and the EDRMS will move it through those steps so that people don't have to think about it. They just do their work and click the finished button, and then it moves on to the next person, and you've got reporting, and that was the dream with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one where I think there has been technical failures. Like there have been more than one organisation I've wandered into where people are like, yeah, we wanted workflow to do this and it didn't. Which is a pity because it does make sense to me. And it is part of going in that direction that you're describing, Judi. I feel like in terms of talking about EDRMS as a failure, it'd be remiss not to also say that um, almost any organisation, I mean a government department, to be blunt, that I've walked into where we talk about disposal from an EDRMS, records folks normally have really low confidence that things are actually filed correctly against the requirements. And so they have real concerns that disposal actually ought not to happen or would require a bunch of refiling or a bunch of basically further work. So I think, again, that's another failure. It's like if there's a system, we talked about different customers of the system and, records being one of them. If it's not even working for records in terms of that subset of information that's going in there, then, I believe that's a failure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very small percentage of agencies that are actually destroying things. I know I run into the same thing all the time, and I have also made this point about the fact that we keep talking about disposition at the level of the aggregation, but every time somebody wants to destroy something, they go to the file and they go through every document in the
yeah,
file to make
yep,
sure that it does actually belong in that
yep.
aggregation, because they don't trust the person who was supposed to put
You
it there.
might as well do it at the document level then. Yep. Well, you are
Yeah,
doing it at the document level, yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. There's a real thing about practice versus policy there, right?
Yeah.
You know,
But it's failing at the
yeah.
people
Well,
stuff again, and I think didn't we do like 5 episodes on the people stuff?
no doubt.
Several.
Yeah. Cool. So I reckon let's call that one to a close. I think there's a lot of useful stuff in there, or I'd hope there is. And we have kind of been touching on Microsoft 365. So the plan is that we'll go there next. We'll do a straight up 365 episode. So thanks one and all for listening, and Judy and Karl for contributing. And we'll catch you next time.
Yes, and please comments on this
Yeah,
one.
yeah, please, yeah,
Agree, disagree, screaming rant about it. We really
Yeah, yeah,
want to know.
yeah.
We think this is a conversation worth starting and worth having. So please tell us all what you think.
absolutely. Thanks all.
Bye for now.